Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom from the holy city of Yerushalayim. Today, the 14th day of the month of Mar Cheshvan of this year of redemption, 5784, Hey Taf Shin Pei Dalet, the letters of which spell out the Hebrew words Pedei Tash, redeem the weak. And while the war here continues in the Holy Land of Israel, I would like to lift our eyes above the immediate situation and to discuss a subject that I have very long wanted to discuss, and that is the allusions in the prophecy of Isaiah to the war of Gog and Magog. And before I begin that, let me just mention, of course, that the main specific references to the war of Gog and Magog in our prophets is in the prophecies of Ezekiel in chapters 38 and 39, and in the prophecy of Zechariah in chapters 12 and 14. And the subject of the war of Gog and Magog does not appear to be explicitly mentioned in the prophecy of Isaiah. Now, I will share with you that I've been struggling to understand and learn the prophecies of Isaiah for many years, and I've always found the book of Isaiah to be one of the hardest of all the books of the Tanakh. The language is very, very flighty. In Hebrew, we call this melitza, the beauty of the eloquence of the very heights of the Hebrew of the prophets. And the language is full of allusions, very, very difficult to understand. And for many years, I followed the practice of every year going through the entire books of the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, the prophets and the holy writings. And the schedule for this study is found in the Azamra page, Know Your Bible. And in the series of Know Your Bible, we follow the traditional order of the study of the great prophets, and we come to the study of the three lengthiest of our prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, during the summertime. And according to the Talmud, the best order in which to study the prophets is to start with Jeremiah, to follow with Ezekiel, and to conclude with Isaiah. And the reason given is that Jeremiah was actually living through the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, the first temple in Jerusalem. He witnessed the destruction and the exile firsthand, and much of his prophecy is heavy reproof to Israel, also to the nations, but primarily to Israel and Jerusalem. And although there are passages of comfort in Jeremiah, a very great passage of comfort, such as in chapter 31, nevertheless, most of the prophecy is tochacha, reproof. And Ezekiel, who also lived through the period of the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, though not in the land of Israel, Ezekiel had already been taken into exile with the first exile of Judah, with Daniel and his companions under the king Jechoniah, some years before the destruction of the temple. And Ezekiel witnessed the destruction from afar in Babylon and received prophecies about it. And the later part of Ezekiel is about the resurrection of the dead and the unification of the houses of Judah and the 10 tribes of Israel, Ephraim, and finally, after the depiction of the war of Gog and Magog, the final order of the land of Israel with the Holy Temple, the coming third temple, and the apportion of the land to the tribes in the closing chapters of Ezekiel, chapters 40 to 48. So Ezekiel is partly reproof and partly comfort. Whereas our sages said that the reason for concluding with Isaiah in the study of the big three is because Isaiah is mostly nechamot, mostly comfort. Not to say that Isaiah is without reproof. Indeed, part of the amazing power of Isaiah is how reproof and comfort are woven together. There will be no comfort for the wicked. There will be comfort for the returnees, for the penitents, and comfort for the tzaddikim. But we know that the later portions, particularly of Isaiah, are replete with the most amazing passages of comfort. So that's the order in which to study the prophets. And in fact, that is quite the opposite order from the chronology of these prophets. Because Isaiah was living several generations before Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And yet Isaiah is considered to be the Lord of the prophets, the later prophets after Moses. Why was Isaiah accorded this great privilege of being the prince, the master of the prophets? Our sages answered, because he served God Almighty with simcha, with joy. And because of his joy and his love for Israel, he was accorded the privilege of reaching the greatest heights of prophecy. And that's what's so important for us today. That is why I have been chosen to give this discussion today, even though right now in our annual cycle of the Know Your Bible study, we are far away from Isaiah. We've just now recently concluded the book of Joshua and launching into the book of Judges, and we'll not be getting through to Isaiah until quite a long way into next summer. However, we have also, those of you who have been following the cycle, we have recently concluded the book of Isaiah. We did that just before the festival of Sukkot, before the high holidays. And so certainly Isaiah is somewhat fresh in the minds of those who have been studying the cycle. And I'd like to, before getting into the subject of how Isaiah relates to the war of Gog and Magog, which apparently is not mentioned explicitly through the book of Isaiah, how is it that Isaiah gets to this situation? And to do that, we need to have a look at the history of Isaiah and his period. Well, the book of Isaiah opens, here is my Hebrew edition, and the book of Isaiah opens actually by setting exactly the historical period of the prophet. Chapter 1, verse 1, Isaiah, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw relating to Judah and Jerusalem in the days of King Uzziah, Yotam, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the kings of Judah. Well, that's quite a long list of the kings of Judah, and understanding who these kings are and what happened in their reigns is important to understand what I'm going to be discussing today. Isaiah's prophecy began, it is said, in the days of King Uzziah. King Uzziah, who is also known by several other names in the Tanakh, also known as Azariah, was a very righteous king of Judah who was living quite a number of generations before the destruction. They were living after the king Joash. Joash was the king who was almost killed with all of the rest of the seed of David by the wicked Athaliah, but Joash was hidden by Jehoiada, the high priest, in the temple, and at the age of 8 he was revealed, and the priests and the leaders of the people conspired to eject Atalia, who was from the house of Achav. She was related to the wicked Isabel, the wife of Achav. They were the idolaters of Shomron, of the 10 tribes, and they almost succeeded in destroying, God forbid, the seed of David. But Joash was saved, and Joash was the father of Amaziah. And King Amaziah gave birth to the line of the later kings of Judah, including Azariah. Well, Azariah was considered to be a very great tzaddik. However, he was so filled with his own righteousness that he decided that he ought to be the one to offer the incense in the holy sanctuary in the temple in Jerusalem. The incense was the special privilege of the Kohanim, the priests. Aaron and the priestly line alone were permitted to offer the incense offering in the temple. We see in the book of Numbers how Korach, when he and his 250 followers tried to offer the incense, they were destroyed. Korach was swallowed up by the earth, but this did not deter Uzziyahu, and he went into the sanctuary of the temple with the incense despite the warnings of the priests. And as he offered the incense, tzoraat, leprosy, burst forth on his head. Well, tzoraat, which is the most serious form of impurity caused by a person's sins, disqualifies the holder from serving in office, and for that reason, the king had to retire, and the regency of his son Yotam began and extended for several years until Azariah passed away, and then Yotam, the second king in this list, became the king. Yotam was a very righteous king, in fact so righteous that it is said that he could have, if he had put his merits together with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they could have saved all the generations. And part of the irony of the kings of Judah is how there's this swing back and forth, a righteous king, a wicked king, a righteous king, a wicked king. And the son of Yotam is King Ahaz, who is considered to be one of the most wicked of the kings of Judah. It was Achav who said that if you can prevent the kid goats from advancing, you destroy the goats, there won't be any generation to come, and therefore he closed all the Batei Midrash, all of the study halls, not to let the children learn Torah, with the intent that this way Israel would stray entirely from the Torah, and the whole promise of the covenant would be lost. Well, this again was a dire threat to what Jerusalem and the temple and the priesthood and the kingship of David were all about. Well, amazingly, with this swing forth at the time when the study halls had been closed, the temple was neglected, and the priests and the Levites were neglected, at this moment was born King Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz. Now, it's very ironic that the whole of Christianity is actually built on the verses in Isaiah, which apparently are misquoted and falsified by the Christians, who say that the verse says that a virgin has given birth. And this whole passage in the beginning chapters of Isaiah is really totally misinterpreted by the Christians, because they have completely missed the historical context of the birth of Hezekiah. The birth of Hezekiah came during the reign of Ahaz, at a dire time for the children of Israel in the land of Israel, with all of their enemies, the Philistines, the Arameans, the Syrians, all causing trouble to Israel, north, south, back and forth. And the first chapters of Isaiah, which really take place in the reign of Ahaz, the opening chapters tell Ahaz, look, you've gone completely wrong, but I'd like to give you a prophecy. There's going to be a son born in which very great miracles will take place in his time. And this is a reference to Hezekiah. So here the whole twist of the replacement theology of establishment Christianity is shown to be very far from the truth, because we have not yet begun to understand who exactly is the object of this prophecy, that the prophet says a child is born and the great redemption will take place in his time. This is Hezekiah, who amazingly, the mysteries of the kings of Judah are really incomprehensible. That out of the righteousness of King David comes the supreme sage of all time, King Solomon, and yet incomprehensibly Solomon goes off track, and he takes wives from all of the surrounding nations, and they are allowed to continue with their idolatries in Jerusalem. And after that, there's a steady decline. Solomon's son, Rehoboam. However, there's a return. A better times come after the son of Rehoboam, which is Aviam or Aviyah. Then comes King Asa, who through most of his reign was very righteous. And when Asa fought his wars, Asa knew that he must cry out to God. At least in the earlier part of his reign, Asa knew this. Asa went off the tracks later on in his reign, and after that time, his son Yoshaphat was a very great tzaddik. But we see by the time we get down to Ahaz, we have this Rasha who is on the throne, who is trying to separate Israel from the Torah. And amazingly, this mystery that Ahaz's son, Hezekiah, is the greatest of all the revivalists of the kings of Judah. This is the mystery, that we come from Ahaz on the one hand right over to Hezekiah. Hezekiah comes onto the throne of David, and immediately he takes the body of Ahaz out of the grave, and he ties the body of Ahaz to a wagon, and he pulls the corpse of Ahaz through the streets to demonstrate that Hezekiah is completely against the line of Ahaz. It's a completely new direction. A phenomenal overnight. There was always in the people of Judah and Israel this rock-bottom faith in God. This explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut, that even though we have much evil in our hearts, we have the good of the holy soul, the Nefesh Eloki, and this is what keeps us always attached to God, even if we tend to diverge from the Torah. So when Hezekiah came to the throne, the first thing he wanted to do is to clean up the whole place. He goes into this huge campaign to clean up Judah, to reinstitute the temple service. Hezekiah reorganizes the priests and the Levites. He reestablishes everything in the temple, and he has this great celebration of Pesach Chizkiyahu, a most amazing figure. And now here is the point of connection between Hezekiah and the war of Gog and Magog. Before we move a moment further, let's say that there is no before and after in the Torah. Chapters of the Torah cannot be read consecutively as a chronological line. And our sages tell us that the opening chapter of Isaiah chapter 1 is not actually where the prophecy of Isaiah began. The prophecy of Isaiah actually began as recounted in chapter 6 of the book of Isaiah, when Isaiah tells us that he was in the sanctuary and he had a revelation from God, and there he saw the angels, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Well, this prophecy is said to have come to Isaiah on the day that Azariah on the day that the king burned the incense in the sanctuary, and this caused a complete earthquake. The whole earth trembled. Whether this earthquake is to be understood as a literal earthquake or as a spiritual earthquake of the nature we are now going through across the world, in any case it is described as an earthquake. A whole shift in something happens between the later kings of Judah and the priesthood, and the line is now opened up. So chapters 1 through 5 of Isaiah are actually situated chronologically in the reign of Ahaz, before Hezekiah has actually appeared on the scene. And in these first 5 chapters, we're hearing that the principal threats faced by Judah in the time of Ahaz were coming from Israel's immediate neighbors. That is to say, the 2 main threats were the 2 powers. There was the kingdom of Ephraim, based in Shomron, and there was the foreign kingdom of Aram, based in Damascus. And these were constantly conspiring to undermine Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the place of the temple of God for all time, the place of the temple for all time. And they wanted to hijack this, just like the 10 tribes had hijacked the service of the temple and tried to turn it into idolatrous service from Dan to Beersheba. Well, now, these early chapters of Isaiah introduce us to the whole corrupt and decadent culture of Jerusalem in these later years before Hezekiah came onto the scene. And we have extremely sharp, critical descriptions of the arrogance and the vanity of the scholars and the sages and the self-avowed tzaddikim of Jerusalem. So now, when these 2 kingdoms of Shomron, the house of Ephraim, and Aram are threatening Israel, meanwhile a far greater threat is arising from the increasingly powerful empire of Ashur, that is Assyria. And here is where we are going to make our connections. Isaiah had this 2020 vision backwards and forwards, from the beginning of creation to the end of days. He sees everything and he gives it over to us in the clearest possible terms he's allowed to, with the metaphors and the images. So he sees Nebuchadnezzar, who's going to come 5 or 6 generations later to destroy the temple. He knows all about Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He knows he's going to be overthrown. He already prophesies his overthrow. Isaiah sees the overthrow of all of the nations: Egypt, Moab, Ammon, Damascus, Aram. But the growth of Ashur is the single most important feature throughout the book of Isaiah, because this is what occupies the reigns of Hezekiah, who came after Ahaz. And Ashur remained the major threat on the horizon, which became actually manifest. And now let's get to the point of where is the connection between Isaiah, Hezekiah, and the war of Gog and Magog. For this, we need to take a clue from Tractate Sanhedrin in the Babylonian Talmud, where the Talmud states that the divine plan was that Hezekiah should be King Mashiach, and that Ashur should be Gog and Magog, that Sennacherib the king, they should be the leaders of the war of Gog and Magog. And why did this not happen? Why did Hezekiah not attain the level of Mashiach? And why was the war of Sennacherib against Jerusalem not the final war? Because Hezekiah, after the miraculous overthrow of Ashur, of Sennacherib, he did not sing a song. Now Moses, after the crossing of the Red Sea, stood with Israel watching the sea return to its place, the bodies of the Egyptians floating on the waters, and Israel with Moses sang a song of praise to God. What is a song? A song is made of a series of notes and words. You go up, you go down, up and down, and the song conveys a total, a whole, a totality. The song puts all the pieces together and weaves them into a whole. And the song of the sea, the song sung by Moses and Israel after the crossing of the sea, was the song of Hashgacha, the song of God's detailed providence over his firstborn son, Israel, where we see every aspect of the miracle of the sea becomes a manifestation of God's detailed providence over the history of Israel. And this was an integral part of the miracle, that not only did the miracle happen to save Israel, but forever afterwards we are aware of this miracle. And indeed, Isaiah in his prophet tells us that in time to come at the end of days, the song will be sung that will overpower the exodus from Egypt. But Hezekiah did not sing that song. Hezekiah apparently did not attain the level where he could put it all together and turn it into a song of faith for all time. Whatever the reason, I can't understand or try to speculate what exactly this part of the saying of the sages means. What I want to say here is that Hezekiah was intended to be Moshiach, and Sanherib was intended to be Gog and Magog. And that is precisely what makes the prophecy of Isaiah so important to us. It's not that somehow Sanherib was the wrong guy. He was exactly the right guy. It's not as if Hezekiah was the wrong guy. He had the soul of David HaMelech, King David. It was not right at that time yet. However, because our prophets, all of the prophets included in our canon of the Bible, the Tanakh, all of these are for all time. That is why Isaiah's prophecy is so relevant to us today. Because there were millions of prophets. That was what the children of Israel did in the Holy Land. They didn't ride around Tel Aviv in sports cars and try and go to discos and so on. They were engaged in the arts of prayer, the arts of meditation, the arts of Torah that connects you with God Almighty. So the Talmud in Tractate Megillah tells us there were millions of prophets in the Holy Land, but there were only those chosen, 48, whose prophecies were chosen to be recorded for all time. So now, if we understand that Sennacherib and Ashur are Gog and Magog, and Hezekiah is Melech Moshiach, now the whole move of the book of Isaiah will begin to unravel itself, because it's in the later chapters of Isaiah, prior to chapter 40, from chapters 30, the late 30s, that the actual historical description of the siege of Sennacherib on Jerusalem is given. And here we have practically identical narrative with these parallel sections in the book of Kings, the second book of Kings, and likewise in the book of Chronicles, where in the narratives of the reign of Hezekiah, the same basic story is given. Ashur is an immense area, Assyria, that is north of the land of Israel and stretching all the way up to the areas between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which are precisely the areas where the kingdom of Gog is said to have been. According to our sages, when Noah left the ark, the world was divided into three portions, north, middle, and south. And the children of Japheth got the northern portion. The children of Ham got the southern portion. And the middle portion was given to the children of Shem. So the ark is said to have come to a rest on Mount Ararat, which is in that area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And that is precisely in the area where today you have Tbilisi and those areas there. These are Tuval corresponds to Tbilisi, and so Ashur is geographically related to the whole area from which King Gog of Magog is said to have come. Now, the details of all the allies of King Gog, who forms this huge alliance of all the nations to come against Israel, according to the prophecy of Ezekiel, all this is happening when the nation that has long been in exile have finally come back to their land. So that clearly would be an allusion to the war of Gog and Magog that comes after the end of the present exile, after the end of the Edomite Ishmaelite exile. Well, that's what we are in now, and successively Israel have been returning to the land for the last maybe over 1,000 years and more. There's been increasingly exponential arrival of Yehudim into the land of Israel, and more coming. So the prophecy of Ezekiel, chapter 38, of the time frame of Gog and Magog, obviously puts this way after even the first exile of Judah to Babylon, way in the future, the end of days. Nevertheless, our sages in Sanhedrin are saying that the archetypal war of Gog and Magog was already taking place in the days of Hezekiah. Before I go a step further, let me just say that the original prophecy of the war on Gog and Magog is to be found embedded in the 5 books of Moses in the book of Bamidbar. Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, in the portion of Baalotcha, in the second half of the parashah, there are the complaints of Israel. We want meat. We want a better diet than this manna. And Moses says, I can't do this. And God says to him, well, you take 70 elders and they will share the burden with you. And of course, there's 12 tribes with 70 elders. If you have 6 from each tribe, that's 72. So 2 were left out of the role of being members of the 70. Who were those 2? The portion says that Eldad and Medad were left in the camp and they were prophesying. And although our text in Numbers does not state explicitly what they were prophesying, if you want the secret, you'll find it in the Aramaic translation of that section in the Targum Yonatan. There's 2 Targums on the 5 books of Moses. One is that of Onkelos, which is the best known. The second is Targum of Yonatan, who was several generations before Onkelos, 2 generations before Onkelos, Yonatan ben Uziel, and he was the leading disciple of Hillel. And our Targum is said to have come min hashomayim, from the heavens, and every word of our Targum is treated with the same reverence as the words of the Torah itself. And there, Targum Yonatan says they were prophesying about 2 things. One was that Moses is not going to lead Israel into the land, it will be Joshua. And that's why Joshua says, Moses, stop them, I can't listen to this. And the other was that there's going to be the war of Gog and Magog at the end of time, and Israel will be saved and redeemed. So there in the 5 books of Moses, in the Targum of Yonatan, we have the first reference to Gog and Magog. But now in the time of Sennacherib, and Ashur, we have a whole new level. In last Shabbat's portion, the portion of Lech Lecha, we saw the archetypal war of all time, the war of the 4 kings against the 5 kings. And indeed, those 4 kings who made war against the 5 Canaanite kings in the land of Israel, the kings of Sodom and the other cities, they were all from that area of Gog and Magog. And indeed, our sages in the Midrash do darshan the war of the 4 kings against the 5 as relating to the 4 exiles. But the war of Gog and Magog is actually the culmination of all the exiles. I heard from the late Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, of blessed memory, the dean of the renewed Sanhedrin, that all of the villains of the biblical times are reincarnated at the end of days. He said this specifically about Saddam Hussein, the tyrant of Iraq, and I assume it would apply today. We can see clearly that the leader of Turkey, Erdogan, is now saying that he wants to restore the Turkish empire, and Turkey indeed would be one of the best candidates today to be in the role of Gog and Magog as the leaders. But now, the point about Sennacherib is that he's by no means alone. He had the ambition to be what our sages called a cosmocrator, one who had power over the whole cosmos. He wanted to have power over the whole, everything under the kippah, everything under the dome of the heavens. Sennacherib had a very interesting policy. In his conquest, what he intended to do was to break people's links with their native land. And in order to do this, he used the method of population exchange, which has been used historically by powers that wanted to rule over other powers. They shifted them physically. It's very interesting that today most people in the world are steadily losing, if they have not lost, their relationship to the land. It's largely minority survivors who retain some desire to connect with the land. This will be certainly true in the people of Israel, who have a craving to connect with our historical land. I believe that those who call themselves MAGA could also be said to have a connection with the land, although interestingly, the land they want to connect with is not the land that many, many generations ago their ancestors came from. And this is something different. This is no longer a relationship between a people in the biblical sense and a specific land. But anyway, this was the plan of Sennacherib, and he had an amazing ascent, success, as depicted in Isaiah, and his success in the conquest of all the nations, including our own brothers and sisters, the 10 tribes of Israel, who were taken into their final exile, which until today is not complete, apparently, the 10 tribes of Israel. If we follow the later sections of the Book of Kings, we see how successively the first of the 10 tribes, Reuben and Manasseh and Gad, were taken into exile, and then Naphtali and the other of the 10 tribes, until eventually Sennacherib took them all away and sent them over to what is now Afghanistan and Iran and Central Asia. Whether they remained there, what exactly happened to them, is probably one of the most interesting and important historical questions that Israel faces And I wish we had a solution, but it's not my intention to get into that. What Sanherib did was to replace the population that he had shifted from Samaria and the historical lands of the children of Israel. What he did to replace it was to bring people from areas in the further east, particularly those who came from a place called Kuta, who were known as the Kutim, and who were brought to Samaria, and they were therefore called Samaritans, and in Hebrew they are called the Shomronim, or in the language of our sages, the Kutim, having come from Kuta. All of this is described in the later parts of the second book of Kings, and the Sumerians were idolaters as described there, but there was an infestation of lions into the Holy Land, which caused them all out of fear to believe they must pacify the god of the land, and they became some kind of converts, although not complete converts in the eyes of our sages. Well, now, Sanherib brought massive armies to the Holy Land, and they're all standing around Jerusalem in a siege after he's already conquered Samaria and all of the lands of the tribes of Israel, not to speak of all the other nations. And now he sends Rav Shokeh, who is said to have been a Jewish heretic who put himself in the service of Sennacherib, and he sent him to taunt the inhabitants of Jerusalem who were holding out to resist against him. And here is the real point of this whole discussion, that the physical odds against Hezekiah and his band of followers in Jerusalem were overwhelming. There's a siege going on. Hezekiah had already taken precautions. He had fortified Jerusalem. He had prepared resources of water. He'd stopped up the water from the enemies getting their hands on them, and taken other precautions. But he was just a mortal. The real strength of Hezekiah, and this we need to understand from all of the preceding portions of the book of Isaiah and all the successive portions, the strength of Hezekiah was Isaiah. Isaiah was the strength behind the throne at a time when there was a fifth column in Israel. A fifth column under the leadership of none other than the priest who was head of the arrangements in the Holy Temple. He was the priest under whose authority, he was not the high priest, but he was the man who was actually the administrator of the temple. His name is Shevna. Now, the role of Shevna is only found elusively in Isaiah. Isaiah does not explicitly explain what was going on. All this is brought out by our sages in the tractate Sanhedrin. When Sanherib and his forces came to Jerusalem, Shevna wanted to surrender. Shevna wanted to open the gates of Jerusalem and do whatever Sanherib said. There was Rav Shokeh standing outside the ramparts of Jerusalem, yelling at the top of his voice, as written there at the end in Isaiah, in second book of Kings, and in Chronicles, screaming out, "Look, what hope do you have, you guys? How many horses do you have? You don't have enough riders. Even though I gave you so many horses, you couldn't put riders on them. You have no power, you have no strength. We're going to destroy you. Why don't you just give up?" And here is a parallel with our time, as we are seeing in our days. Across the world, literally all over the globe today, there are hundreds and thousands and millions of people who are vociferously expressing their complete support from those who are sworn to destroy the people of Israel and eject all Israelites from the land of Israel. And we see that nations across the world are condemning Israel, that the head of United Nations condemns Israel, that people across the world are marching in the streets against Israel, and anybody without nerves of steel would say, what hope do we have? What possible chance is that anything can come out of this? Now, I'm not saying that today our situation exactly parallels the situation of Jerusalem and Judah at the time of the siege of Sancheriv. And I'm not going to say now that we are now in the final stages of the war of Gog and Magog. Anybody with a bit of an imagination who is not going to recoil from thinking about this can think of far worse scenarios than even the horrific scenarios we have been witnessing. Another thing to stress is that there were many wars against Israel throughout the period of the Tanakh, from the time of King David, the end of the reign of Solomon, when the first rebellions begin, and then the rebellion of Edom, and then the rebellion of Moab, and the wars of Ammon and Syrians. There's constant wars, and the prophets explain that as long as you guys, Israel, are far from the Torah, God is going to beat you with this rod of affliction. Beginning of the book of Judges, where the book enumerates the nations that God intentionally left to chastise and test Israel because the young did not know about the miracles of God, and therefore they had to learn the arts of physical war. We need a king like Hezekiah, and we wait for Melech HaMoshiach, who will show us beyond all doubt that the miracles that Israel experienced at the time of the exodus from Egypt can take place again if we will completely embrace God's kingship and Torah with all our hearts, join all of us together in unity and determined to serve God. And when the moment will come that the pressures will be upon us, that we will come to the stage, then will come the redemption. But what I want to emphasize is why the prophecies of Isaiah are such a source of inspiration that is necessary for us today. Because precisely the situation Hezekiah and his minority, they are said to have been 1/5 of the people of Jerusalem, with 4/5 willing to surrender. The power of Isaiah, the power of Hezekiah, backed up by Isaiah, and it's in it's against that backdrop that we need to be learning Isaiah. Now, I say apologetically that for those who can only learn the words of Isaiah in the translation in English, it's going to be quite difficult to get what I've been talking about. It took me years of going through again and again until the fog began to clear. I've only been able to sort of get this by studying the Targums, the Aramaic translations, with their words here and there, and also the great Torah commentators, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the prince of all the commentators, the medieval commentator on all of the Bible, all of the Talmud, the commentary of Rabbi David Kimche, known as Radak, a medieval commentator, the commentary of Metzudat David, who was much later in the late 1700s, as well as other commentaries, the Malbim and many others. And then when you look at the words of Isaiah, and I hope one day God will give me the strength to offer a study of the prophecies of Isaiah, particularly with the focus on this theme. But I would like to conclude with a piece of guidance found in Isaiah that I mention again and again, and I have no shame in repeating it. It's in Isaiah chapter 26, verse 20, where he says, "Go, my people, come into your room, close the door behind you, wait until the anger will pass." Now, our sages tell us, there in the commentaries, Rashi says it, Radak says it, Masudat David says it, this is said for the time of Gog and Magog. It's just one of the many places where Isaiah gives us vital guidance for today. As I said last week, we are not all combatants on the battlefield, and our prayers are for all our soldiers who are sacrificing their lives, who are sacrificing for the sake of the sanctification of the name of God, to remove this dire threat to people living in this holy land who have been subject to the horrors of terror, of murder, of brutality, the greatest atrocities, and not something new that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. And those who only read today's newspapers and forget what happened a little before cannot understand the historical perspective. But our prayers are for those who are fighting evil, who are fighting terror, who are fighting barbarians. But our task, we are not on the actual battlefield, is to be combatants in the war of Hashem, the war of God, because that's what this is all about ultimately. It's about destroying evil so that humanity can come to know God without being under the shadow of guns and of wicked intimidation. We need to rid the world of this evil so Melech Mashiach will be able to reign and spread his light over the world. Now the punchline of Isaiah is precisely there in those chapters from 38 onwards, 38 and 39, where what happens? There is hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of peoples from all over. Sanherib brought them from the north, from the south, from Africa. And overnight, the entire camp of the Assyrians is wiped out by an angel of God. According to the Talmud, what happened is that God opened the ears of this mighty army to the song of the angels in the heaven, and from the sheer beauty and radiance of the song, their souls just left them, and the whole camp was left dead there outside Jerusalem. And Sennacherib goes running back to Assyria in shame and disgrace, and he goes to the temple of his god, and two of his sons come and assassinate him there, and that's the inglorious end of Sennacherib. You can read a bit about it in the prophecies of the Ezekiel and Jeremiah about the souls of the kings in hell. What happens afterwards? Now, Rashi tells us in his commentary on Isaiah much earlier in the book that after the overthrow of Sennacherib and his armies, there's millions of foreign people all around Jerusalem wondering, now that they've been defeated by the God of Israel, what's going to happen to them? And they're expecting that Hezekiah is going to come out and butcher them all. And what does he do? He teaches them all the 7 commandments of the children of Noah. And they all undertake the 7 commandments of the children of Noah, and they actually build an altar to God in Egypt, to the true God, the one God. And that is the explanation of a verse in Isaiah that there will be a temple to God in Egypt. This took place after the overthrow of Sennacherib in the time of Hezekiah. In other words, the war of Gog and Magog is intended to be something that will completely shake the entire world. There in Zechariah, we hear about this great earthquake, Zechariah chapter 14. Is it a physical earthquake, or is it an earthquake of all of the earth of our rock bottom assumptions and beliefs that's going to be completely shaken. Well, it certainly looks now that people across the world are getting shaken. And when the prophet says, "Go, my people, into your room, close behind the door behind you," our commentators say there, our sages are saying, go into the chambers of your heart, go into the chamber of prayer, go into the chamber of Torah, the divine wisdom that guides us for all time, because here you will find the answer to what is going on now. The good news is that Israel comes out of the war of Gog and Magog with the victory of God. Nowhere is it prophesied in any of the books of the Nevi'im that there will, God forbid, be a third destruction or a third exile. On the contrary, we are now seeing that people across the world, actually many Jewish people, are seriously thinking that now indeed has come the time that they must pick up and plan practically to come to the land of Israel. Well, we can't just sit back and say, well, he's going to help us, we're going to see a great miracle. We do have to do our thing. We have to do our thing with the intensity of our prayers, with the intensity of our service of God, with our devotion to the commandments, of going that extra mile, that extra. That's what it's about, going extra. I have seen many of the little video clips of the Rebbe of Lubavitch in the days when he was seeing hundreds of people every Sunday lining up to have a few words with him. And in his talks to his followers, again and again, the same message. You must do extra. You're learning this much Torah today. Add another 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Add another bit. He says to a man that gave $1 million to Lubavitch charity, he said, well, next year you'll give $2 million. And extra. Each time we must try extra. And with this, God will respond, and we shall in our time see the complete redemption. So, my dear friends, let us do that. Go to our inner chambers of our hearts, inner chambers of our prayers, and embrace the Lord God who is talking to us now so loud. Shalom and blessings from the holy city of Yerushalayim.